If you're getting out of a toxic relationship and you're stuck in a loop trying to make sense of it all, then you are probably up at 3 a.m. replaying conversations, constantly analyzing her behavior, reviewing texts, trying to understand her motives. And maybe you're fantasizing about reconciliation or mentally arguing with her. You're probably checking her social media and revisiting all those memories, trying to figure out what was real. And no matter how much you think about it, you just keep looping. And after a while, those cycles of rumination can make you feel like you're losing your mind. I'm Lise Leblanc, therapist, author, and life coach, and I help men recover from narcissistic and emotionally abusive relationships. And in this video, I'm going to explain 3 reasons why rumination can become addictive after toxic relationships. And I'm also going to give you 3 tips on how to finally step out of the loop. Because one of the biggest mistakes men make is believing that if they can just find that missing piece of this puzzle, everything will fall into place and finally make sense, and they'll get back to themselves again. But here's the problem. In the beginning, rumination actually does help you understand why you became so attached, why you missed or ignored red flags, and it can help you reconnect with your own reality and protect yourself moving forward. So it helps you realize that you're not crazy, you're not alone, and there's a reason that this affected you so deeply. And that understanding can drastically reduce emotional distress. For some men, it's even life saving. So, rumination is repetitive, emotionally charged thinking that initially is helpful and productive, but eventually turns into compulsive mental looping. That's just like a broken record. So, then instead of gaining insight and clarity, it keeps you circling the same questions. Why did she do that? Did she love me? Was any of it real? Could I have done something different? Could we still fix it? And for a lot of men, the rumination becomes self attacking. Why did I miss or ignore the red flags? Why didn't I leave sooner? Why did I tolerate this? But even the self attack is a protective mechanism. What's often happening is the survival part of your brain is trying to create enough pain, shame, and fear to make sure that you never end up in a situation like this again. So instead of helping you heal, the rumination ends up keeping you emotionally stuck because the thoughts become so repetitive and emotionally intense and exhausting that eventually you start needing relief from your own thoughts. And that's often when men reach for unhealthy coping mechanisms, or maybe even go back into the relationship just to escape the rumination. So, the first reason that rumination becomes so addictive is because it turns into a coping mechanism to regulate your nervous system. So, your brain is using rumination as a way to reduce anxiety, regain a sense of control, soothe abandonment distress, escape emotional pain, create certainty where there is none. And every time you go back into that mental replay, it does change how you feel for a moment. So you might feel focused, connected, stimulated, or just distracted. For example, if you're romanticizing the relationship and focusing on the good parts, it can give you temporary relief from the loneliness, the sadness, the grief. Or when you're feeling anxious and helpless, you might ruminate about all the bad parts, the lies, the disrespect, and betrayals, which makes you angry. And anger is a much more powerful state. So your brain starts seeing rumination as a tool to change your emotional state. So even when the rumination feels miserable, there is a psychological payoff. So now every time that pain comes back, your mind automatically goes back into the loop because your nervous system wants and needs that relief and regulation. And that's the trap because the loop becomes less about understanding the relationship and more about regulating your nervous system. The second reason rumination can become addictive, especially for high functioning men, is that it creates the illusion of control and competence. Most of your life, your ability to analyze, to be persistent, and solve complex problems has been rewarded in all kinds of ways. So your brain learned if I stay with this problem long enough, I will eventually figure it out. And that's true in many areas of life. But toxic relationships don't work like normal problems. There is no clean, logical solution to chaos, inconsistency, manipulation, and betrayal. And there are a lot of betrayals in these types of relationships. And if you'd like me to talk more about betrayal trauma, just type betrayal in the comment section below. Okay, so because your brain can't make sense of all the contradictions and the betrayals from this person who you thought was your soulmate, your mind keeps looping, trying to make sense of all those inconsistencies, refusing to accept that you got emotionally attached, neurologically hijacked by this person despite the red flags. And that doesn't feel safe. And it creates a lot of cognitive dissonance. So you keep trying to find a consistent answer that would finally crack the code and allow you to feel safe again. And every time you go back into the analysis, you do temporarily feel more secure and competent because it feels like you're doing something productive, working the problem, getting closer to a solution. And for a moment, the rumination gives you relief from the confusion, from the contradictions, from the cognitive dissonance. So you replay the lies, the manipulation, the red flags, and it temporarily reconnects you to reality, validates what you experienced, and that's part of what makes this loop so addictive. And you think you're making meaningful progress, that you're getting somewhere, that you're working towards resolution. But after a certain point, you're not gaining more insight. You're looping and burning a huge amount of time and energy replaying the same broken record. So, the third reason rumination becomes addictive is that this isn't just a thinking problem, it is neurological. Every time you ruminate, you reactivate the emotional and neurochemical circuitry, the dopamine, the anticipation, the relief, the longing, the stress response, the bonding chemicals. So even though the relationship might be physically over, you're reactivating it neurologically. And every time you go back to her mentally, you're unknowingly strengthening that circuitry, the trauma bond. And that's why some men can stay attached for years long after the relationship is over. Not because they're weak, but because they keep reactivating the reward, relief, and attachment pathways tied to the relationship. So, when you go back and look at all of this together, you start to understand how rumination turns into this multi purpose coping strategy. It helps you regulate emotional pain. It keeps you feeling productive instead of powerless. And at an even deeper level, the rumination also helps you avoid the painful reality because as long as you stay mentally engaged with this relationship and this person, you don't have to fully accept the loss, the grief, or the finality of it. But here's the truth: acceptance is painful, but it's also what finally sets you free. So, how do you actually break free from this loop once you realize that it's no longer getting you anywhere? First thing, name it and track your triggers. So the first step is recognizing that rumination is not random, it's triggered. So start paying attention to the conditions that activate the loop and ask yourself, what was happening right before it started? Was I feeling lonely, rejected, tired, bored, stressed? Did I see or hear something that reminded me of her? Because the moment you start seeing what triggered it, you can start predicting it. So it won't feel so automatic and mysterious. And instead of getting hijacked by what seems to be these random bouts of rumination, you start realizing, wait, there are triggers. This is predictable. And that's why journaling, voice notes, or even using AI to help you track patterns can be incredibly helpful. Not to spend another 4 hours obsessing about her and going down all these rabbit holes, but to start seeing the patterns so that you can stop getting blindsided by it. Number two, delay it and contain it. So, right now, the moment the urge to ruminate shows up, you just jump right into that loop. And once that thought train leaves the station, it's very hard to stop once it's going full speed ahead. So the goal is to interrupt it early. So the moment you catch yourself looping, pause, name it out loud. I'm ruminating. And then delay it. Tell yourself, not now, because you don't want to ruminate while you're emotionally activated. That's when you lose hours going down those same rabbit holes. So It's okay if you still need to process this stuff, but do it later at a scheduled time that's not too close to bedtime. So you can journal, reflect, research, but again, contain it and set a timer to decide in advance how much time you're going to spend ruminating or researching, because the goal is intentional processing instead of compulsive looping. And another thing, at some point, you're going to want to switch the problem you're solving. So instead of asking, how do I figure her out? Start asking, how do I stop spending so much time and energy on this compulsive looping? Because you end up not just losing years to the relationship, you can also lose years of your life afterwards, trapped in these rumination loops, still replaying, analyzing, and staying emotionally stuck. And that can rob you of the opportunity to fully move on, rebuild your life, and finally put energy into finding peace and eventually healthy love. Number three, starve it. So instead of feeding the trauma bond, start starving the circuitry that's keeping it alive. So when the urge hits, use distress tolerance strategies that actually move you toward long term healing instead of temporary relief. And I've added a link in the description section below with all kinds of strategies that you can get started with right away. If this video resonated with you, I want you to understand something important. Recovery starts when you stop feeding the loop and start reclaiming your mind, your energy, and your life. And if you're trying to break free from a trauma bond, I'd suggest reaching out to a therapist in your area who specializes in narcissistic abuse, and consider my toxic relationship recovery program that I linked below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.